The road was quiet that morning, a pale stretch of dust-worn asphalt dividing the brittle grasslands. Heat had not yet risen from the ground, and the air carried only the low hush of wind moving through thorn trees. But at the edge of a bend, a shape, still stretched out, its color nearly blending with the road's surface. It wasn't until the truck slowed that the form sharpened. Not debris, not a carcass. The lion's ribs rose faintly once, then again. He was collapsed across the sunlit road, his sides sunken, his face turned toward the dry horizon. His mane was matted and thin, curled in clumps around a face too gaunt for strength. The pads of his paws were cracked and raw. Flies gathered at the edges of his eyes, undisturbed. His body, motionless. But the eyes, barely open, followed the tires as they rolled to a halt. The ranger left the door ajar and stepped out slowly. This was no kill scene, no predator caught off guard. This was surrender. A lion who had walked until walking failed him, who had laid down not to sleep, but to let the earth take what it would. The ranger stood quietly, unsure whether to kneel or remain still. There was no rush in a moment like this. From a safe distance he watched the lion's chest rise again, slow, shallow, almost hollow. The body held the marks of age, but not old age. This was no elder of the plains, no lion pushed aside by younger males. This was hunger, long hunger, and perhaps thirst even more cruel. The ranger scanned the horizon, no herd in sight, no pride, only this one, alone, motionless in the road, barely clinging to the shape of what he once was. The lion tried to move. Not a roar, not even a sound, but a shift of one shoulder, the movement of a creature who remembered what standing felt like. His paw scraped once against the gravel and stopped. The muscles, thin beneath his pelt, trembled, and then gave up again. A shadow passed briefly as a bird circled overhead. The ranger radioed in softly, voice low and measured. "Found one. Male lion, still breathing, needs help." His eyes never left the lion's. They did not blink, only narrowed slightly at the sound of wind lifting dust beside them. The sun inched higher. Heat shimmered on the road. The lion's breath became slower, not in warning, but in resignation, as though each exhale cost too much, as though even blinking had become optional. The ranger crouched a few steps closer, not enough to cause alarm, but enough to offer presence. Nothing was said aloud. There was no plan yet, just witness. The animal made no move to flee, no effort to defend. Only his eyes shifted, a tired glance, not of fear, but of absence. Time passed in the quiet. The truck engine was turned off, the stillness deeper now. Only insects clicked in the grass. The ranger pulled a cloth from the seat, dipped it lightly in the last of his canteen, and set it gently near the lion's front paw. A small kindness, however unnoticed. From afar, the lion's frame looked regal still, the shoulders, the reach of his limbs. But up close it was clear. This was a body in retreat, not from battle, but from hunger, from days under sun with nothing to follow. There were no wounds, only the slow unraveling of life. A breeze passed. The lion's ear twitched once, faintly. A flicker. The ranger's voice returned, softer now. "Hang in there, old boy." There was no answer, but for a moment the lion's paw shifted. Not forward, not in defense, but toward the road's edge, as if the instinct to move hadn't completely left him. And then stillness again. Dust, curling in the light. The low hum of silence stretching wide over the grasslands, and the quiet breath of a lion. Not gone. Not yet. The hours drifted forward as the heat began to swell across the plain. Thin waves of warmth shimmered above the road as the lion's body remained stretched in its quiet collapse. Every so often, a fly would lift and resettle on the cracked skin beneath his eye. His breath came slow, uneven. The ranger, kneeling a few steps back, had not moved much. A call had been placed to base, voice low and cautious, not expecting urgency but hoping for chance. The reply had come. A rescue team would try, but the land was wide and time was never kind to the weak. Somewhere beyond the nearby trees, a sound rose faintly. The subtle trickle of shallow runoff, a narrow channel still holding a pocket of water from the last rains. The lion's ears, dulled by exhaustion, gave a small twitch. It was not full attention, but something in him had heard it. Slowly, his head lifted from the gravel. The effort alone seemed to pull from a place long since drained. His foreleg shifted, scraping against the road's warm surface, claws half extended with no intention. Again, he tried. Muscles along his shoulder flinched once, then sagged. His back legs remained still. The body wanted to rise, but the body was empty. The ranger watched without speaking. He could see the effort, not noble, not cinematic, but raw. A slow, pitiful heave, a tremble, then stillness again. Flies returned in a soft cloud, landing along the lion's spine, his ribs, the damp corner of his eye. He blinked slowly once. Then nothing. A breeze passed and lifted a curl of dust from the roadside. The ranger stood and walked slowly to the back of the truck. There was no sedation, no crates, no prepared plan. Just a half canister of water and some rags already too dry. He opened the lid, poured what he could into a dented bowl, and stepped forward again. Kneeling, he placed the water down gently just beyond the lion's front paw. The lion did not move. Minutes passed. One leg shifted slightly, dragging itself along the dirt toward the water's scent. His nostrils flared faintly, then calmed. The water remained untouched. The ranger pulled back, sitting cross-legged now at the edge of the road. He said only one thing, barely audible. "Come on, boy, try again." The lion's ears turned slightly at the sound but gave no more reply. His breathing grew heavier, not faster, just more labored, more deliberate. With each rise of his chest, the effort showed in the long pause between. The waiting was thick with stillness. Grass moved gently beyond the tree line, bending under the warm press of wind. A small blackbird hopped near, then darted off. The lion blinked again and shifted his chin forward. The bowl of water remained between them, a few inches too far, a few hours too late. But he tried once more. His paw scraped toward it with the slow, uncertain movement of something not quite instinct, but memory. The pads dragged softly in the gravel, then froze again. In the distance, the low hum of tires began to whisper across the plain. Help was on the way, but the ranger did not look up. His eyes remained on the lion, on the water, on the stillness that seemed to grow heavier with each breath. The second vehicle came slowly, its weight settling into the road with care. Dust lifted in soft spirals as the engine quieted. Two figures stepped out, both in faded field uniforms, their movements deliberate and hushed. The ranger met them at the edge of the gravel, his voice low, his face drawn tight with waiting. No one approached the lion right away. They stood together first, watching from a respectful distance. The body on the road had not moved. The bowl of water still sat untouched in the dust. The sun shrinking its contents by the hour. They spoke only in short exchanges: oxygen, vitals, proximity to water. One of them, a woman with her sleeves rolled just above the elbow, knelt down and scanned with a narrow scope. No injuries, no visible wounds, just starvation, prolonged, silent, and likely irreversible. She glanced at the lion's limbs. Muscles had wasted into hard angles. The skin along his ribcage shifted with each breath, brittle and shallow. The lion's head stirred slightly as they approached, though not in protest. His eyes opened, dull and rimmed with dust. One of his ears folded back, not in defense but from the faint recognition of movement. There was no growl, no sound. Only the faint lift of his tail. Not a warning, but the weak memory of being watched. The second rescuer placed a mat nearby, Not the kind for transport. It was soft and made for easing, an offering of comfort, not capture. They crouched slowly beside him, their hands remaining low, movements unhurried. The lion did not rise, did not flinch. Only one paw shifted beneath him, curling slightly as if to hold on to the earth. The woman reached out with her fingers, brushing the fur near his spine. It was coarse and warm from the road, and beneath it the skin sagged with dehydration. The lion exhaled faintly, more sound than breath, then closed his eyes again. No one rushed. They let the stillness remain. Lifting a creature that size, even in weakness, held danger. But there was no aggression in him, no hint of tension in his limbs. His body had passed beyond fear. What remained now was a flickering thread of breath, suspended between instinct and surrender. They rolled the mat carefully, inch by inch, beneath his ribs. The movement stirred dust. His eyes opened once more. A low sound came from deep in his throat, not sharp, not warning, but something rooted in confusion. The ranger, kneeling just above his shoulder, placed a hand near his mane and whispered quietly, "It's okay. We're here now." The lion did not move away. His body sagged into the mat. His tail lifted once more, then fell limp. Together, the three humans began to shift his weight, slowly. Always watching his face, always waiting for the flicker of refusal. But it never came. What strength he had was spent, given over to gravity, to time. As they lifted him fully from the road, his legs hung loose. A single paw dragged across the gravel, claws dull against stone. His breathing was shallow but steady. Not restful, just continuing. One of the team adjusted the IV drip, already prepared. It would be a slow feed. Nothing could be rushed in this state. Once settled in the truck bed, cushioned and covered from direct sun, the lion made no attempt to rise. But he blinked more often now, eyes moving gently as if measuring the nearness of new shapes. There was no sign of fight, no warning flare in his gaze. Only a flicker of awareness, faint but still there. Wind moved through the grass at the road's edge. A pair of hornbills called from the trees. The rescue team stepped back for a moment, letting the lion rest in the quiet. His chest rose, fell, rose again, and the road, once empty, now held the fragile weight of one life returned to hands that would try, carefully, to give it back. The tarp had been stretched between two trees, offering a narrow wedge of shade just beyond the dry track. Beneath it, the lion lay curled on his side, ribs moving with the rhythm of shallow breaths. His fur held the faint scent of road dust and dried blood, though there were no open wounds. His head rested low, eyes half-lidded but not closed, watching the ground without focus. The team had not spoken much since the lift. Voices, when used, stayed hushed. There was a weight to the air now, not of panic, but of waiting. One rescuer knelt beside him with a syringe and a shallow dish. The drip had been started earlier, slowly feeding fluid through a narrow vein, but it wasn't enough. They needed him to swallow, to respond. The water in the dish shimmered with light, catching the edge of the wind that moved around them like a whisper. The woman wet a small sponge and pressed it gently to the lion's lips. At first, nothing. His jaw remained slack. She tried again, drawing a trickle across his tongue. His ear twitched, his eye opened a little wider. Then the tongue moved, not fully, not with purpose, but enough to taste. She dipped the sponge again. A drop of water fell to the earth beneath his muzzle. Then another. The lion shifted his head slightly. The movement was sluggish, uncoordinated, like a dream half-remembered. His nostrils flared faintly. The next time she pressed the sponge near, he flicked his tongue toward it. The effort was minute, but undeniable. The team exchanged a look, not triumph, just confirmation. Something had returned. Over the next hour, they continued. Sponge, trickle, pause. Patience ruled the space between moments. His eyes opened more fully. His paw flexed once, claws scraping gently against the dirt. Then quiet again. The lion did not try to rise. But his chest no longer heaved with the same strain. The breathing had steadied, if only slightly. Later, as afternoon passed into its quieter stretch, a shadow moved across the lion's back. He stirred again, one hind leg shifting beneath him, the motion unsteady but purposeful. His head lifted, low and heavy. The muscles in his shoulder tightened. He grunted softly, the first vocal sound he had made. It was not fear. It was not warning. It was effort. The ranger stepped forward, crouching low. He said only a few words, quiet, as if speaking to the ground. Almost there. The lion's front paw pushed into the earth. His limbs trembled, knees bending with resistance. His torso lifted slightly. For a long moment, he froze there, halfway between lying and rising. His head hung low, eyes focused nowhere. But then his back legs engaged. The shake of his body was visible, a tremor rippling through skin stretched thin across bone. He rose, not fully upright, not proud, but standing. His paws pressed into the earth, his tail dragged behind. His chest moved faster now, breath catching up to muscle. He swayed slightly, but he remained. The team did not move toward him. No one reached out. They simply watched. The lion turned his head. Slowly, a blink, a pause. Then, with unhurried, uneven steps, he walked a few paces forward into the patch of shade, where the dirt stayed cool and the air carried the scent of dry bark and distant leaves. There, he stopped. He lowered his body again, not collapsing this time, but choosing. Front legs, then back, sinking into rest. Leaves rustled gently overhead. Far off, something chirped in the grass. And in that stillness, broken only by breath, a lion lay alive. By morning, the ground was cool again, streaked with the soft tracks of insects and the faint prints of night visitors. The lion had rested through the hours when the air turned still and blue, his chest rising with steadier rhythm, his limbs folded beneath him in a way that suggested not weakness, but pause. Around him, the field team kept their movements measured and minimal, tending the quiet details, replacing fluid, checking distance, speaking only when needed. No one reached for him. They understood now that what strength he found would have to be his alone. When the sun rose higher and the breeze began to lift the grasses again, the lion stirred. First a flick of the tail, then a slow tilt of his head. He blinked, watching the swaying branches, the pattern of shadow and dust. The stillness was different now, not weighted, not desperate, only calm. A kind of waiting that belonged to no one but him. His body rose in stages. First the shoulders, then the long stretch of hind legs pulling beneath him. He wavered briefly, shifting his weight, claws adjusting to the firmness of the earth. But the motion held purpose. Not survival, movement, return. The ranger, crouched near the vehicle, stayed silent. He didn't call out, didn't encourage, he only watched. The lion took a few slow steps toward the tree line. The grass brushed his sides. His gait was uneven but certain. With each pace he seemed to remember something. The sound of the dry leaves underfoot, the scent of sun-warmed bark, the weight of his body reconnecting with ground that was once his. He stopped once, ears lifting at the distant cry of birds overhead, then walked on. His tail dragged faintly through the dust. They had marked no collar, no tracking tag. The decision had been made quietly among them, to let him go as he had come, unclaimed, unnamed. He bore no identity in their files, only a date, a location, a moment. The lion passed through the tall grass without turning. He did not glance back. He did not pause for farewell. His body, though still lean, moved now with the rhythm of something remembered. The team did not follow. They stayed behind, hands resting by their sides, eyes tracing his slow, steady exit. At the forest edge, the lion stopped once more. His mane shifted slightly in the wind, and his ears turned toward the dry rattle of insects hidden in the brush. Then he stepped forward and was gone, swallowed by the land, by the wild that had thinned him and waited for his return. The ranger remained still, his breath held in the silence that followed. In his chest was no triumph, no closure, just a weight that would stay with him, part ache, part gratitude. The grass moved in slow waves, bent by the soft wind, and in the distance the trees stood waiting, unchanged. The ranger did not move for some time after the lion vanished into the bush. He stood with the dust at his boots, the warmth of the day rising around him, and the outline of paw prints softening in the earth. His radio remained silent at his belt, the others choosing not to disturb the quiet. Some silences held more truth than words could carry, and this one was full of weight, not heavy with sadness, but with something older, something that stretched back before roads, before fences, before help arrived in trucks. A silence that belonged to the wild alone. He walked a few paces forward and stopped at the first track the lion had left. It was shallow but clear, pressed into the ground with just enough pressure to speak of weight returned. The curve of each toe, the spread of the pad, the absence of dragging, all of it said what no voice could. He had walked away whole, or as close to whole as time would allow. Behind him, the team had begun to pack slowly. No rush. The mat was folded, the canister emptied, the sponge rinsed and laid out to dry. There were no photographs taken, no post made to mark the moment. No one said, "We saved him," because they hadn't. They had simply waited, offered, stepped back. The lion had decided the rest. As the ranger moved toward the truck, a breeze picked up again. It rustled the grasses where the lion had disappeared, but gave nothing back. No sound, no movement. He was gone now, not far, but no longer theirs. They drove in silence for a while, the tires crushing gravel in slow rhythm. At a rise in the track, the ranger turned his head and looked back one last time. The patch of shade where the lion had first rested was now empty, but something about it felt changed. Not marked, but remembered. As if the land itself had taken a breath and would hold it for years. The team parted ways at the outpost. There were other animals to monitor, traps to check, calls to answer. But the ranger sat a little longer in his cabin. He poured water into a basin, rinsed the dust from his arms, and watched as it ran in streaks across the steel. On a small shelf near the window was a worn field log. He opened it, found a blank page, and wrote only the date. No name, no coordinates, no details. Just the day a lion rose from the road and walked back into the silence. That night, the wind came low and cool, pulling smoke from distant cook fires across the veldt. Somewhere, out in the dark, a lion moved, weakened, cautious but walking. Perhaps he would find his way back to a pride, or perhaps he never had one to return to. Maybe he would sleep beneath low branches and listen to the calls of others he didn't answer. No one would know. But the earth beneath him would remember the shape of his weight, the low sound of his breath, the warmth of his body pressed into its dust. In the following days, the team passed through the area more than once. No tracks. No sightings. Only the quiet rustle of tall grass and the regular passing of antelope in the distance. Other lions were heard far off, calling in the hours before dawn, but none moved close. It was as if the land had agreed to keep his story secret, a pact made in silence, kept by wind and stone. The ranger returned one afternoon with a new group, young volunteers from the city, eager to learn field protocols. They walked the edge of the same track, unaware of what had passed there days before. The ranger pointed out soil moisture, broken thorns, the signs of porcupine trails and jackal scat. When they passed the shaded tree, one of them paused and asked if anything had happened there. The ranger looked for a long moment, then shook his head. "Just wind," he said. But that night, when the fires were low and the voices had gone soft, he stepped away from the others. He walked to the edge of the compound and looked out toward the dark line of trees beyond the road. He listened for movement, a shift of grass, the faint crush of soil beneath weight. There was nothing, but still he stayed a little while longer. In the months that followed, new rescues came. A buffalo calf with an infected leg, a cheetah caught in snare wire, a rhino whose horn had been torn away too early. The team worked with the same rhythm, quiet, patient, never forceful. But sometimes, when the sun hit the edge of the savanna just so, casting long shadows across the open stretches of land, the ranger would pause and feel again the slow, dragging breath of the lion on that road. Not in memory, but as if it remained, hovering in the air, unclaimed. There was no celebration the day the lion had stood, no announcement when he disappeared. But in the still hours of dusk, when the bush turns golden and the birds fall quiet, something about the land felt slightly fuller, as if a thread once fraying had found its place again. Not mended, just returned. The ranger knew he would likely never see that lion again. Even if he did, he wouldn't recognize him. The mane would grow back, the scars would shift. Nature reshaped its survivors in silence. But he held something from that day. Not a photo, not a mark, just a feeling. The way it had felt to kneel beside a creature at the edge of leaving and say nothing. The way it had felt to watch life choose itself again and step back into the tall grass without asking permission. And sometimes, when he was alone, he would whisper what he had not said then. "You were never ours." The bush carried on. The herds moved. Storms came and dried up again. But somewhere beyond the reach of roads and radios, a lion walked still, slower than he once had, but with purpose, feeding when he could, resting often, listening to the land breathe around him. He left no trail, only a story, kept not in words, but in the rhythm of one man's chest when he remembered. And in the final hours of that season, when the rains began to threaten the horizon again and the dust turned dark beneath the wind, the ranger returned once more to the place where the lion had stood. He brought no tools, no team, only stillness. He crouched near the same stretch of earth and let the silence pass over him like water. Then, standing, he looked toward the bush and gave a single nod. A gust moved through the grass. Then it passed, and the road was quiet again.